Hello, Darshan Maharaja here. I'm sure many of you have seen this video of Prime Minister Trudeau at the G20 summit in Brazil, where he said that putting food on the table and paying your rent is less of a priority than fighting climate change. And I thought this requires a little bit of analysis, although it is so incredibly out of touch with ordinary people's lives that one doesn't need to analyze it for others. Everybody understands how loopy this statement is. But the problem is that the whole issue of climate change has become a huge grift. And if you say anything against the ongoing grift, you are called a climate denier. That is very far from true. I've written an article some years ago, in fact, on the transition troubles, where my contention was that given the trajectory of human civilization, uh, at some point we will not rely on fossil fuels to the extent that we do, and it is likely that we may have completely moved away from fossil fuels. This is not to say that oil and gas won't have a role to play in human lives, because there are so many other uses, notably for a whole host of materials out of which a lot of products are made, etc. But if you try to say anything against the actions of the government ostensibly to fight climate change, then you are called a climate denier. And this is not new, but what is new is the Prime Minister himself putting basic necessities of housing and food ahead of his, what is frankly, ideological agenda, where we are seeing that there are a lot of news showing that this direction that the government has taken is not the best advised one. Let me just put it mildly here. For example, recently we learned that the battery manufacturer Northvolt, into which the government had pumped in billions of dollars, is now facing down the barrel at bankruptcy. Or we learned that the cricket manufacturing plant, I mean, protein manufacturing plant, but the protein was supposed to be made from crickets. Klaus Schwab and his Eat Z Bugs formula, where also I think about $16 million of subsidy had been given for that plant. Now that plant has laid off something like two-thirds of their workforce, and they are trying to reorganize and see how they can become viable. These are the kinds of grift or wasteful spending, depending on your point of view, where people see that this whole fight for climate change has degenerated into something else. And even then, the Prime Minister wants us to prioritize fighting climate change more than basic necessities. Like if someone is unfortunately struggling to put food on the table for their kids and for themselves, we know that a lot of people are now sacrificing on their own food so they can feed their kids. At a time like that, this is, in my view, completely tone deaf for the Prime Minister to say. Now, you know, another thing about the whole climate grift that doesn't talked about as much as it should is the whole biomass energy sector, which basically means that we are cutting down forests and burning the wood to create to generate electricity and then calling it green energy. By what stretch of logic this can be considered to be helping the planet or fighting climate change, I don't know, because we should have more trees, not cut down entire forests. But this is something that doesn't talked about as much as it should. The human nature is what the Prime Minister is going against now, which is survival instinct. Your first priority is always survival. And when that is at stake, nothing else would rank higher in priorities for anyone. I mean, uh, It's just basic human nature. We are wired to think that way. And then for the prime minister to say what he did is, I don't know what kind of frame of mind he is in now, because his polls are tanking, parliament is at a standstill. Recently, there was this report, or I think editorial in the Globe and Mail, where they pointed out that since September, the parliament's working has been brought to a standstill, barring the question period and a couple of other, basic administrative matters. So, at a time when the parliament needs to be working on how to resolve the multitude of problems that the ordinary Canadian is facing, at that time, parliament is not working. This is again, it shows how uh, the concerns and worries of ordinary Canadians are not resonating with this government. And the Globe and Mail piece also pointed out that if this stalemate continues in the House of Commons, then it will mean that almost half of the working days of the House of Commons would have been lost. So far, over 20% of the working days have been lost already. Out of the 122 days, House of Commons has been basically not functioning for 26 days. So that's more than a fifth of the total time during which they are supposed to work out and discuss and debate how to uh, alleviate the situation of all Canadians. But instead of that, they come out with gimmicky measures. Like today, Prime Minister Trudeau announced that the federal government would be sending out checks for $250 for every Canadian who was working and made less than 150,000. Now, like all policies that are made in a knee-jerk fashion without adequate thinking, this one also has its own drawbacks. For example, I saw it pointed out that pensioners would not qualify for this very tiny amount of money, which is basically our own money, is just giving it back to us and expecting us to be grateful. But even then, pensioners would not be getting that because they were not working. Uh, so that these are the kinds of gaps in that hastily devised policy. Then the GST exemption for 2 months for certain basic necessities, which is actually someone pointed out, Jennifer on Twitter. I'm good friends with her. She pointed out, she pulled out a tweet from former Conservative Party of Canada leader Erin O'Toole from August 2021, where Mr. O'Toole had made this promise. So it looks like these guys have no new arrows in their quiver. It's only something that has existed that they can pull out, and typically it is either a kind of a patchwork job of GST exemption on certain items for a couple of months, or a $250 check, or in the case of Atlantic Canada, exemption from carbon tax on heating oil. And these are all ad hoc policies. A nation's governance cannot depend on these. But that is where we are. Like we saw the grocery rebate a few months back, which turned out to be uh, not what was advertised. So, you know, I think we need to push for truth in advertising in government also, because the advertisement says something and then the reality turns out to be something else. And especially when there were very big photo ops, like in case of giving all that billions of dollars of subsidy to Northvolt or to this cricket processing plant. Uh, and then when things don't go well, or when they actually go south, there hasn't been a statement from any politician, and notably the prime minister himself, who was uh, like in front of the cameras. And okay, he was, he has a right to decide that. But when The big claims that were made at the time turn out to be false hopes in a short time. He needs to be in front of the camera again to explain to us why and what kind of developments led to a different outcome. But we know that he uh, always blames somebody else, like in the recent video that he posted, which to me looked like the liberal team is trying to copy the video making style of Pierre Poilievre and his team of the Conservative Party. But in that, he talked about immigration, and it was basically everybody else's fault. Greedy employers and colleges and all those. Like it was never mentioned that it was the federal government that issued all those visas to 3 million people. So that is kind of pattern that we have seen with this prime minister for 9 years now. Now, another thing that I wanted to include in this discussion was the recent opinion polls that I saw about voting intentions and the likely seats that each party is projected to get. And in the Maritimes, inexplicably, the Liberals are still at 29%. In Ontario, they are at 24%, which is still too high for my liking, but uh, still not worrisome, like 29%, almost a third. And everywhere else, they are well below 20%, like 13, 15%, and in that range. And they are projected to get 66 seats as of the latest poll that I saw. So, which means that all the policy announcements or ad hoc decisions or knee jerk decisions, whatever you want to call them, they will be aimed at preserving certain specific seats. And as we know from Foreign Minister Melanie Joly, it is the that dictate demographics of a particular riding that dictate the policy of the federal government of Canada. Now, this is the really worrying part. I am keeping my hopes up, but it's a little bit difficult to do that because if they are trying to save very, very specific seats, then the policies will be probably at the expense of Canadians outside of certain ridings. Let me know what you think. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, goodbye and be well.